So she answered the phone and they asked her about him, and she said they already killed him. And she mentions that in the background, it sounded like the person who was saying it had a, it sounded like they were excited, and he was announcing to the other people in the background, like they're almost happy to hear that. So they turned off the phone, and that was the end of that interaction. And I think between that, a span of some minutes, I was I was called and told that, so my brother was in contact with some people, and he was trying to figure out who can intervene and all that. And so these people said to give a number of somebody that is inside the house to call so that they would sort out the situation, maybe figure out what's happening. So he gave my number. And when he gave my number to them, they called me on the phone, and someone said that they were calling from the president's office at the time that morning on 13th. And when they called and said they were calling from the president's office, they asked me about my dad. And I said, well, given that my mother already told whoever was calling, claiming to be from the, and possibly so, claiming to be from the chief of army staff's office, since she's already told them that they'd killed my dad. So I maintained the same thing. I told the person calling when they asked me for my dad that I don't know where he is. I just told them I don't know where he is, but I think they killed him. I think the army killed him. And they even asked where specifically I was. Was I in our house? Was I somewhere else? I said I was in a neighboring home. I went into a neighbor's house and I hid there. And I told them that I was there with I think I told them I was there with my sisters and a few other people. I'm not sure if I mentioned my mom, but I think I did. Anyway, they said that they would ask the soldiers to withdraw. Shortly after that, the same person who called me again, and also asked, no, actually he didn't ask. He informed me to go outside of the building, that they have asked the soldiers to withdraw. And I said that I could clearly hear the gunshots. I could still hear the chants of Allah Akbar. I could still hear people outside, and I could still hear the shooting. So I actually held up the phone and said, could you hear what I'm hearing? Because there's still shooting going on. The soldiers haven't withdrawn. But the person insisted, no, they have. We've actually given the order. So shortly after, it clearly wasn't true. So they said that they would send somebody to our house at the time, and that someone would probably, they're claiming that the person would stop the shooting. So a few hours after that, when I was mentioning so I'm just going to skip, obviously, sorry, I'm going back and forth a bunch, but when I finished talking to them and they insisted, this person said that I should come outside and said I wouldn't. They said they would send someone. In a few hours, someone will be there in our house, and they would actually ask the soldiers to withdraw. And a little bit after this phone call, I got a phone call from some reporter from BBC Radio, and he also asked the same thing and asked if he could actually broadcast my voice live. And I said that would be fine. And so this BBC reporter, he called all of these phone calls, at least these other phone calls, were happening through at least the BBC call, and the one for the one that claimed they were calling from the Chief of Army Staff's office was on my dad's phone. But I answered the BBC call. So this is a reporter that my dad already knew anyway. So I answered the call and told the reporter the same thing. I said I didn't know where my dad was, and that I was hiding in a neighbor's house, and that I believe that they killed my parents. At least I think I told them I believe they killed my dad. The army had killed my dad. And so obviously thinking that maybe if I said that, because it's going live, as we could still hear the sounds of different brothers and sisters, we could still hear the shootings and everything. We thought maybe if they assumed they might have killed my dad, maybe they would actually withdraw, and maybe, not end up killing as many people as they ended up doing. So after this phone call, so at this point, I'm going to get back to where we were at, a few hours later, at this point, I think around 3 p.m., in my grandmother's room, another person called again. And this time on my phone, the same person who, at least claiming to be the person that was sent from the president's office, and was asking me to come outside, that the soldiers have been withdrawn, even though we could clearly hear the soldiers. And it turns out that they not only didn't withdraw, but they actually didn't withdraw for days or weeks after that from that area. So when this person called, I said I still was in a neighbor's house, and that we were hiding in a neighbor's house, and that I didn't know where my dad was. I believe he was killed, all that. We had the same conversation, and he insisted that I came outside or tell them which neighbor's house I was in. I didn't. So I turned off my phone after that, because I wasn't sure, what could come from that. So since it seemed very clearly they weren't really trying to ask the soldiers to withdraw, they were just trying to figure out where exactly we were in that area. So I turned off the phone, and after the fires got to my grandmother's room, we went outside, and it looked like the laundry room wasn't burnt, it was intact. And especially because the tank, while we were in my grandmother's room, we heard the bursting of the tank. There's water tanks, because that normally keeps reserves of water from the borehole. So it was on the decking of the laundry room, and because the laundry room roofing wasn't connected to any of the other places, and it was a decking and didn't have any wood or anything like that, it didn't burn. And because of the bursting of that tank, it cooled down the room. So we actually went into the laundry room, and when we came out in the second courtyard, there were a lot of people there. No, not people, I mean, there were a lot of bodies of people there that have been killed. At least we believed all that we saw there were killed at the time. And we went into the laundry room, and we all squeezed in there, because it wasn't a very big room. And at that point, I think there was myself, my mother, 3 of my brothers, 2 of my sisters, and I think 4 or 5 of the people that we ran into. I think there was 5. No, it's not 4. I think it's 5 people that were there. So 1 was injured in the leg, and my brother also had an issue with his leg because he was shot the previous year during the Quds Day massacre, and so he couldn't really fold his leg. And even though the space was very small and most of us were, folding our legs there, there's a table there that both of the 2 of them who were injured in the legs were on the tables. I think some other people were there with them. And then my dad went way into the room behind the table, and some of us were all over the place between there. So we were there in that room for all of the night, until the morning of 14th. And during the night, we could hear some sounds, but very, sporadically, and also mostly from far. It didn't look like it was right there. And a few times we could hear maybe the soldiers patrolling along that area. We could hear at least movements and voices, and we assumed it was the soldiers, even though we didn't look out because we couldn't. It wasn't like we had an open window or something like that. So when it was morning, we all came outside, and my dad wanted to check, and one of my brothers, I think 2 of my brothers, wanted to check what's, the area and see what's happening, right? To check out what's going on. And also they wanted to see, because there was fire everywhere the day before, and they wanted to see if there was, what was burned, what didn't burn. Are there any people around, all that. So they went in, and it looked like everything was really burned down to ashes. I mean, some of the people that were outside, even the 2 people that we saw outside, there's a tree. There's like this large tree in the first courtyard that we were in, and some of the embers from the tree that burned as well, or at least branches of it that burned, came down and also burned parts of their clothes and bodies too. And there was fire everywhere. So they went in to check. They went around the property just to check to see what's there. And it looked like everything really burnt down. There's glasses everywhere that shattered from the fire and everything. And they came back, and then they were telling us that everything looked really burnt. There's nothing there, and some of the building has crumbled too. So during that time, we were all really hungry and thirsty, and there's no water. Like I said, the water tanks all bursted, and there was no water coming out of the taps. And so my brother checked out, like, there's a garden there. Most of the garden is burnt, but the grapevines were still there. So he got some grapes from there. And around that same time, we heard some movements and like a sound. And when we checked, it was one of the bodies that we assumed of people that have been killed previously the day before. But it turns out someone was alive there the whole night. That person was outside. Even though we didn't really hear him during the night. Perhaps he fainted or something like that. I don't know. But my brother fed him some grapes, and he squeezed some grapes. I don't think he could eat it. And we all had a few grapes as well. And a few minutes after that, after seeing this brother outside, even though we couldn't move him, he looked really injured. A few minutes after that, we heard some noises approaching where we were. So we all went back into the room and sat there. And we could hear them asking, where are they? As if they're actually asking somebody to navigate them through the place. I don't know if they were referring to us when they're saying they. I don't know the details of it, since, it's not like we had a conversation afterwards, but they were asking someone in the back. They were talking at least between themselves, and somebody was saying to someone else, where are some people? And we even heard them asking the injured brother that we saw outside that we couldn't move, where's my dad? Like, we heard them asking, saying, where's Malam? And he wouldn't answer them, and it just sounded, and then a few seconds just between that, some of them were over there trying to ask him where my dad was. And then someone opened the door, and then we were all there. And as soon as they saw us in there, I don't think they even knew precisely if my dad was in the room. I don't know, but perhaps they did, or they might have spotted him then. And they said that we should all step out of the room, and we didn't. And they were even asking my mother to take off her hijab, and also that we should all step out of the room. So we didn't, and she was even telling them she wouldn't. And we heard someone ordered them to get an RPG to shoot into the room. And a few, maybe seconds later, I think at best seconds, not minutes, that same person ordered them to take firing positions at the room. And they they made a line like a firing squad, started shooting right at us in the room. And when all the shooting was happening, they shot for a period of time. I don't know how long it was really. I don't think I could figure out how long it took the shooting, but it was a while of shooting, or maybe it seemed like a while of shooting, or perhaps it was even longer. I don't know. But anyway, they shot into the room, and after a while they stopped shooting. And when they finally stopped shooting, a lot of people were shot. So two of my brothers, two little brothers, Humaid and Hamad, were shot. They were killed. At the time, I think one of them was propped. He was sitting against the wall, so it looked like he was propped up against the wall. So they just shot him. He didn't really move. And then the other one was lying down. And when all this was happening, and then my other brother Haider, who I mentioned was shot a year before that. He was actually intact. He wasn't even scraped by a bullet. At least I don't think he was. He didn't mention it. Maybe he didn't notice. I don't know. But I don't think he was even scraped by a bullet. But I turned around. My dad was right next to me, to my right, and he was covered in blood everywhere. And my mom, she was standing before, and then she fell, and she said she was shot. I didn't see any blood. It looked like she didn't bleed instantly. And a few people that were there were also shot. Now, I don't remember who was shot instantly other than what I just mentioned, or who wasn't. There's another brother, I think, his name is Mustafa Lawal, and he was shot there. I think they killed him afterwards, but he wasn't. He was just injured initially. And after this initial shooting, they withdrew from there. They went right outside. There's a third courtyard that they went into, and they were there, and they were announcing that we all come out after the shooting. So of course we ignored most of it, but my brother, Haider, went outside. He was actually really shocked when he turned around and saw my dad covered in blood. My brother's lying there and everything, and he just he went outside. I don't know what was happening fully because I didn't go outside with him, and I was mostly distracted by just seeing my dad covered in blood, and there was blood everywhere, really. And for just while he was outside, I could hear his voice. I can't make out what was happening or what he was saying or any of that. I think he even asked my dad if he could go outside, and my dad told him okay before he did, and then he went right outside, and then we heard shooting, and then he was shot. It turned out they shot him then, and they killed him. And what is this thing called? Yeah, so as I mentioned, my dad was really bleeding. There was just blood everywhere, on his face, everywhere. So I was trying to, I already mentioned earlier that it is a laundry room. So there's some laundry there. So I grabbed some clothes, and we were trying to just stop the bleeding. You know, he had a lot of injuries. His right hand looked really battered, and I think his left leg as well looked really in a bad condition, just very battered. You can almost see the bones and everything, and I think you could see the bones actually. And his hands were just, there was a huge hole in his hand, and then there's like little wounds everywhere, and then there's more. And also his face was covered in blood, and there was white substances there. Later he mentioned that it was actually that he could feel his eyeball, one of his eyeballs on his face. I don't know if it's this one or this one. Yeah, it is the left eye. And he put it back in his eyes, but I mean, it was already destroyed by the shooting. So that's probably part of the white substance that was everywhere. And so we were just focused on that. I was focused on trying to do that. And then a few minutes in between that, while they were still announcing that we all step out of the room, we saw some of the soldiers taking positions on the roofs, looking at the room that we were in, somewhere in the trees. And so all of our focus came to, and I think at that point they definitely knew that they shot my dad, because we could hear some of them saying, he's there, speaking with each other, of course. So they were asking us to leave him in the room, but it did seem really odd that there were snipers everywhere. So we were trying to stay between him and the, just their line of sight, I guess. And in between this time, I think that we were with some other brother who was also not shot at the time, or he was injured. I don't remember. I think he was injured, but he wasn't shot then. I think he was shot earlier. But anyway, he went outside the house, and we actually thought they killed him, but it looked like they arrested him because he actually lived. And so they came back with more soldiers after retreating initially to the other courtyard, and they came back with more soldiers, and they were trying to forcibly take us out of the room because they kept saying we should leave my dad, but we wouldn't. So they kept trying to pull us out of the room. They managed to get my mother, my sister. I think they got some of the people there, and there was a person outside. There were two people outside, I think, that weren't killed, but they beat them up right there. And in all this tussle, later, I don't know if it was it wasn't during the tussle of trying to pull us out. It was when they were announcing that we should leave. My dad asked me to make a few phone calls to call my brother and I think my sister and a few other people, so that he can say his goodbyes or anything like that. And also he was even given instructions on where to be buried and all of that. So I did make all those phone calls. My brother was actually on the phone later on after he initially spoke with them, and then we called him back, and so he could hear everything that was in the background at the time, and all of the announcements that were making, all the tussle and the stuff that was happening there. And later, this is when I think after I made the second phone call to my brother, after my dad made a few more phone calls, that's when they came back to try to forcibly take us out of the room. And so when that was happening, they pulled everybody one after the other. It was just me and my dad left later on. And so I was trying to get them not to, I was trying to, resist them pulling me out of the room. And they eventually did. And when I was pulled out of the room, as soon as that happened, I didn't really see much after that because they were trying to tie me up with a rope. And I was resisting that. And so between the whole struggle of them trying to tie me up and all that, and then a bunch of soldiers just ganged up on me, and so I couldn't really see anything. In fact, I don't even remember, my mom mentioned that she saw my brother hiding there at the one that was shot outside, which I mentioned I didn't see. I don't remember seeing him because, I couldn't actually see. I was surrounded by them. And during this time, they did manage to finally tie me up. And when that happened, one of them was really, I think one of them was mad that I was struggling to resist being tied up. So this person just grabbed my head and rubbed it off the concrete floor. And most of my skin was just torn outside, just torn away. And they pulled me outside of the house. And when I went there, that's when I saw my sister who was there, my sister Zainab, and she was there. And she mentioned that she saw my dad because I didn't see them go out with my dad. Like I said, I was really surrounded by them. I didn't see anything after that. So she mentioned that she saw them take him out and they took him somewhere. She doesn't know where. Shortly after that, when we came outside, we could see a lot of just bodies everywhere, people covered in blood, sunburned, just so many bodies everywhere. It was between coming out, the third courtyard that I mentioned was really filled with especially burnt bodies because there's like a polycarbonate roofing on that. It's not fully closed, but it melted off and it looked like it burned. It also it melted off, and there was fire victims everywhere, right? And when we went outside, there were even more dead bodies everywhere on the streets and everything. And then they pulled us and put us into the car, sorry. And from then I didn't actually see Zainab again. I was taken with Sayyida. I think I must. Anyway, they threw us into the cars, and we were on the floors of the cars. They got in the cars, and they were actually stepping on us. And after we got to the army depot, I fainted after they took us out of the cars. I don't know. It must have been between the beating and the not eating or drinking anything for a while. So I fainted, and I also don't remember most of what happened in between that. I remembered someone helping me up to take me into the clinic they had in the depot. And when I got there, I saw a bunch of sisters that were injured. They didn't look like they were being attended too much. Also, they didn't take me there for treatment or anything. They just took me to detain me there. They kept me on a bed. I don't know if I fell asleep after that or I fainted again, but I woke up later, and that's when I saw that they brought Sayyida in, but they didn't bring my sister Zainab. So I was handcuffed to the bed there. They didn't actually handcuff any of the other people there. They handcuffed me, they handcuffed Sayyida because they brought us together. And then later on, they actually came in to say that they would take us somewhere with our parents, but they didn't. I think twice they came in to mention that, but they didn't actually end up doing that. And the next day, after we spent about a day there, they said that they would move everybody to the hospital. But when they came to move everyone to the hospital, they said they were only moving the other sisters to the hospital, and they kept me and Sajid, but they moved us to another part of the clinic there and kept us, again, not for treatment, just to detain us there. And we were kept in the room for, I think, 3 days at this point, because it was Tuesday and we were released on Friday. And while we were there as well, they kept us handcuffed to the bed. And at night, during the day, they would normally have the soldiers outside. And then sometimes they would step in every now and again. And then at night, they would have, I think the first night they had one person sleep with us there. And then the second night, they had two people, a woman and a man, both soldiers, they slept there. I think the third day or something like that, they sent a nurse, but again, not for much. They just sent a nurse. I think she works there, or I don't know what she was doing really there. She asked us how we were doing and all that. And then that was it. On Friday, they took us out. I think there were a lot of soldiers outside because we could hear them speak to each other. So it sounded like there were a lot of people standing guard outside. They would uncuff us a few times. I think there were times when they brought us food and they would uncuff us. And then there were times when they would also uncuff us to go to the bathroom. They even came in and were telling us that I think they thought when they brought food and we weren't eating, I don't know if they thought we were on a hunger strike or something, but they were saying that our parents were fine and that they spoke on the radio. They said that they would bring the radio. We could hear my dad speaking. They didn't do that. Of course, it turns out that was a lie. And on Friday, they let us go. They took us to the police. They released us to the police. And then the police asked where they would take us. We gave them an address. They later on insisted that no, they have to meet with who they're releasing us to. So they ended up releasing us to our uncle, my dad's older brother, Manab Qadir. They released us to him, to his custody. They actually took us over to his house. And after that, it took about 2 months. I think after we were released initially, for about 2 months, we weren't sure if my parents were alive or not, because there wasn't any concrete anything that shows that. I mean, there's a lot of rumors that were going around. The government was saying they were alive, but we didn't actually see them. We didn't have any contact with them. After about the 2 months, we were allowed, they contacted us and said that we were allowed to visit my parents, and we went to see them, I think February 2016, and we were only there for for about an hour. And even before we got to that, we got to see them. Then they took us to a few people's offices. It was the security people. They were trying to, I mean, they didn't really say it straightforward, but they kept saying things almost implying that we shouldn't speak to anyone about the condition of our parents or something like that. It seemed that they were really trying to get us to, not say anything about what the conditions were or what situation they were in. We went there a few times. They allowed us to visit, I think, once that February, I think a month after that, another time, I think in March. And then I think around April, it was around Ramadan, and it was requested that they would allow us to, at least, because my parents are not in a good, they're not in perfect healthy conditions. And so it was requested that, and obviously they were being kept by themselves, the two of them, and they're both sick and injured. And so they had to do everything for themselves. So it was requested that maybe at least for Ramadan, we could maybe cook for them and send them food. So initially they only agreed to that, but later on they agreed that we could go and stay with them. They agreed that 2 people could go stay with them. We went there, and they allowed us to continue staying even past Ramadan to take care of them. When we went there, they were still not in a very good. They weren't in a good shape. My dad was still limping from the injuries in his leg, and he couldn't use his left arm. He couldn't use his left hand specifically, but he also, his arm was also in pain and everything, just a lot of different injuries all over, and also different health related issues were coming up. So we were allowed to stay there though for a while, and for a few months, I think at the beginning we weren't even allowed to, I mean, they also weren't allowed to have phone calls or anything like that, but later on they allowed some phone calls, with limited time, I think about an hour every week. They allowed them that. All this while there was the court case that was to enforce my parents' fundamental rights, to, that ended up declaring their detention illegal. And by November, I think November or December, when the court ruled that they would be released, we all assumed that they would be released, but they weren't. And eventually the securities moved us to another location. And after this incident of them moving us to another location, I was there with them for, I think, a few more months. I'm not sure exactly, but I think 3 more months or so. And in March 2017, a little bit before that, obviously, we discussed that since, initially my parents thought that they would be released, so I actually put my education on hold to stay with them. But they suggested that maybe I should go back to school because nobody knows how long these people would keep them detained. The government would keep them detained. So we decided that I should go back to school in March, and I did. So that was the last time that I was with them, in March 2017, until when they were released again. When they were released now, in August 2021. So that's about all of the account that I have about, well, the incidents in Zaria and also subsequently staying with them.